All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to 10 Ways to Work More Efficiently with OneDrive for Business. I will be recording this session, so if any of you need to drop out early or something comes up, I'll be sending out the link after it's over. So just a couple of quick notes before we begin. My name is Rachel Wilson, and I will be hosting today. I know a lot of you who joined are familiar with 365 Ninja, but for those of you who aren't, we are a daily newsletter and website with our main goal, as you can see on the screen here, is helping you master Office 365 for free. We provide daily tips and tricks on Office 365 that are aimed at both end users and IT admins and everyone in between. Most of our tips include a short how-to video demonstrating the steps to take a particular action in Office 365, but you'll see articles and news updates and things like that as well. And we've really grown a lot this year to around 10,000 newsletter subscribers, and our library of videos is over 150 now, and we're still growing every day. So this is actually our first webinar, our first live event, and we're pretty excited. So if you haven't yet subscribed to 365 Ninja, you can go to 365ninja.com after this presentation and go ahead and subscribe. And another note, if you do have questions during this presentation, you can enter them in GoToMeeting. You should see a questions field, and I'll keep my eye on them for any really relevant or urgent questions as we go, and if time allows, I'll answer them. But if your question doesn't get answered, if we don't have time to cover it, feel free to send it to me via email after the presentation at ninja@365ninja.com. So, and I'll send that out, the email address out also. And you can also just reply to the reminders for the webinar that you got. All right, so let's jump right in. Today we're going to take a pretty broad look at OneDrive for Business, and the perspective that we'll take is for end users as well as IT users. So if you're a more advanced user, you still may learn some new information or at least some techniques for training or sharing OneDrive for Business with your colleagues. And I'll start by doing a poll to see how we're all using OneDrive for Business. So let me pull up that poll for you all. All right, so I launched a poll, and it changes the window to a new window, so it might have snuck behind some other windows for you. But go ahead and answer the poll, and I'll give a couple moments to get everyone's answers. So it does look like we have a pretty good distribution across IT managers, end users, and people who are going to be using it soon. And we do have a few people who don't use OneDrive for Business very often. And I know that some of these characteristics more than one might apply to you. So we're going to cover all of our bases here. So I'll close the poll and let's jump back into our presentation. All right, so we're going to start by talking about what OneDrive for Business is and what it isn't. And this tool in particular, it's helpful to take that perspective of what it is not, because there's a lot of confusion around it, especially for beginning users. So the first thing to cover is the difference between regular OneDrive and OneDrive for Business. So they're not actually the same thing, even though they have the same name, which of course does get confusing. But all they really have in common is that they're cloud storage services from Microsoft. OneDrive without that for business tag on it is simply personal storage that's associated with your personal free Microsoft account that literally anyone can get. Anyone can use it, and you get at least 15 gigs. You get that for free, but there's also some paid plans. But other than the name and the fact that they both allow you to store files in the cloud, they're pretty different animals. So the similar name can get confusing, like I mentioned earlier, but we'll think of them totally differently, and we're not really going to talk about consumer OneDrive at all after this point. And so let's talk about OneDrive for Business as a component of Office 365. And that's how most of us probably know it, a component of Office 365 or SharePoint Server 2013. But it is actually available as a standalone product subscription as well. And that's just a little bit less common. I think the most common usage that I have seen, at least among 365 Ninja newsletter subscribers, is OneDrive for Business as a part of Office 365. So that's how I'm mainly going to talk about it, but the information that we talk about should apply either way, no matter how you get your OneDrive for Business. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the relationship between OneDrive for Business and SharePoint. And this is what can really trip people up. OneDrive for Business and SharePoint are kind of the same thing, like I say on the screen here. OneDrive for Business is built on top of SharePoint architecture. So we can say that SharePoint is the back end of OneDrive for Business. But one misconception that some people have is that you have to really be an expert in SharePoint to use OneDrive for Business, and that may be the case for some administrators who have a really complex organization, but for the average end user, you don't need to know much about SharePoint really at all in order to use OneDrive for Business. But there is I have seen a lot of questions about what's the difference? Are they the same? Are they different? And it's tough to give a straight answer, but the answer is kind of. So putting it all together, you can understand OneDrive for Business accurately as with two components. It's a sync tool. It's run by individual users, and it sits on top of SharePoint. It's also a brand that we can think of as representing the business version of personal OneDrive. So it has components of all of these three things kind of involved with it. We can think of them alongside each other. And I kind of give all this introductory information because I think it is really important to know all that in order to use the tool effectively. Helps you get a more in-depth understanding of what it is and how it works, and so hopefully that sheds some light. So we're going to move on to some more actionable ways that you can use OneDrive for Business effectively and efficiently. And then towards the end of the presentation, we'll come back to some more of this sort of overview level information. And I do see a couple of questions that have been coming in about the next sync client and OneDrive for Business being Mac compatible. So hopefully, I think we'll have time to kind of hit on those as we go through the presentation. All right, so first we're going to talk about saving, and my recommendation in order to use OneDrive for Business as efficiently as possible is to learn all of the different ways to save so it becomes an automatic instinctive action. And when you first start using the tool, like this is what I experienced personally, you might find yourself instinctively still saving things to your PC desktop or your My Documents folder. So learning these different ways to save can kind of help you override your instincts. So first off, you can create documents from within OneDrive for Business itself, and they automatically sync and save, so you don't even have to think about it. Let me show you what I mean by that. Give me just a moment. All right, so I have my OneDrive for Business up here with 365 Ninja, and what I mean by creating documents from directly inside of OneDrive is to just click this nice big new button. You can create a Word document or any other Office Online doc. And I'll say that I'll name it, I just made this. Let me go back to my OneDrive. Give it a chance to refresh, and you can see that doc that I created just a few seconds ago, it's not shared yet, but it's sitting right there in my documents in OneDrive. So that's the most foolproof way to make sure that your documents get uploaded and synced. But of course, not all of us use Office Online regularly. I think a lot of us on this call or on this webinar might, but I know personally, I use Office 2013 still a lot. So that leads me to the next way of saving, which is via the Office 2013 Save menu. So once you sign in to your Microsoft Business account, you'll have the opportunity to save to OneDrive for Business from your Save menu in Office 2013 applications. And you can even, what I've done is I've even set OneDrive for Business as my auto save location in all of my Office 2013 programs, so that if my computer crashes, something catastrophic happens, all of my documents get recovered there. And also, just when I do my standard Control+S Instinct, the first thing that will come up is my path to OneDrive for Business. So that really helps me out. And then if you don't kind of have those instincts in mind yet, you can always do the sort of old-fashioned File Explorer drag and drop. So if you have saved things to your local machine, and even if you're maybe just getting started and migrating some of your files over, you can simply open a folder in File Explorer and drag and drop right into the web interface of OneDrive for Business. So it has a drag and droppable window that will appear. You can even open up your OneDrive folder in a separate File Explorer window if you're more comfortable with that, and drag and drop between them. Oh, and I do see a comment on here that doesn't work for an entire folder, only for individual files, it looks like. So that is something to keep in mind. It might not be the method that you want to take if you're moving a large folder or something like that. And lastly, you can save your files to OneDrive for Business from Outlook. So we're going to take an individual look at that later, but it does deserve mentioning here. When somebody sends you an attachment, you're able to save directly to a specific folder in OneDrive. So those are the top 4 ways that I've found to save, and once you're familiar with them, having these be second nature will be really helpful in your usage of OneDrive for Business. So next we're going to talk about syncing, which I think is probably on everyone's mind. So before we do that, let me look through the questions really quick. I do have an interesting question. So is there a setting to have items open in new tabs from OneDrive? So I don't know of an overall global setting. I personally use tabs a lot, but I just do sort of a traditional, right click and open a new tab, or I use my mouse. But I don't know of a global setting, but that might exist. So if I do find it, I can get back to you on that. And then a question: of all the ways listed here, which ones will handle special characters or path link errors most effectively? That is a really good question. I don't know if any one way is better at that than the others. I think those limitations that we see around special characters and path link errors are, they kind of happen across all of these, and we'll sort of touch on that a little bit later. I don't have any amazing ninja tricks for that, unfortunately, but it's kind of a workaround and a learning issue. All right, so let's talk about syncing. At the core of OneDrive for Business is its sync technology. So this is a feature that we as users have really come to demand from cloud storage, and that's the ability to synchronize files offline on our various devices so that we can continue to access our files and work from home or on the road or wherever we are. So in order to use OneDrive for Business, I think it is really important to have an understanding, at least at a high level, of how sync works, and what it does and what it doesn't do. So with OneDrive for Business, there's a special app or tool that's installed automatically if you have Office 2013, and if you don't have Office 2013, you can download it as a standalone. That sort of powers the sync, and end users do have control over it. So an end user can kick off a sync or pause or stop syncing if needed. And if there's troubleshooting that needs to be done, which does happen sometimes, and the end user can run a repair tool to do it on their own. And that kind of leads me to mention some things that we've already touched on a little bit, that there are some sync limitations that are important to keep in mind. So it's understandable that some of us get frustrated with these. There are sync limits of a 20,000 document limit, and that number applies to how many files you can synchronize offline. For a lot of us, I would even say the majority of OneDrive for Business users, that number is sufficient. We won't run up against that limitation. But if it does pose problems for your organization, it has been announced that that limit will be changed or removed altogether in the next generation, we can say, sync client. And the same goes for selective sync. So it's also something that comes up a lot, questions that I've gotten a lot about. How can I sync one folder offline but not the rest of them? And we still have a certain amount of, a limited amount sometimes, of storage on our devices. So it's an important question. Right now, the sync client is all or nothing. You can't choose only certain folders to sync. And I have seen some workarounds and third-party tools that can help with that, but I haven't personally tested them very much. So I would say use at your own discretion. But it is announced at Ignite last May. It was announced that a new sync client, the next generation sync client, is coming out, and it's on the Microsoft roadmap for the final quarter of 2015. So we have another couple months to wait for it, but it should include fixes for some of these issues that I've mentioned. And I think that I would say the majority of questions or frustrations that I've seen are circling around sync. So stay tuned. We can be optimistic about some of these fixes coming in. All right, so let me pause one more time and look at some of the questions. So a good question about character limit. So is there a character limit either in document names or full directory references? There is a character limit. Off the top of my head, I don't know what it is, but the file link does have a character limit, and it has to do with SharePoint. So that's something I think if you do a search on, you should be able to find pretty quickly, character length limit or file length limit or character limit in OneDrive for Business. And I can follow up with that offline. And then there are a couple other questions that came up that I will try to get to before the end. So let's talk about sharing. So OneDrive for Business makes collaboration and sharing easy. This is another thing that we have started to expect from our file storage, is the ability to share in an intuitive way. And I would say this is what really differentiates OneDrive for Business from other storage tools, because it's already integrated into Office 365. It's pretty easy to share directly from the web interface. And let me show you an example of that. So we have our same documents folder here in OneDrive for Business, and if I want to share something, you can see I have kind of the notification labels here, what has been shared, what hasn't been shared. Let me share the document that I just made. I'll click share, and I get a pretty intuitive screen here. Some of us use this all the time, so I can invite people depending on whether my Office 365 tenant allows for external sharing or not. I can invite people within my organization or outside of it. So that's an important thing to know from your IT manager, or if you are an IT manager, for your users to get educated on. So I can share, I can add a message, I can change whether I want the recipient to be able to edit or view, and then I can click share and they'll get a message to view that document. And then I have visually it shows me that I've shared it with somebody else. And I can keep track of who it's been shared with. If I go back to that screen and look at my shared with menu here, and I can always revoke sharing if I'd like to say stop sharing, and then they're not able to see anymore. So that's just a kind of a basic routine for sharing. You're able to invite people to edit or view, like I mentioned, and you have a few other options. You can also create a configurable link if you just like to send a URL. And of course, end users can keep track of who they've shared documents with via this tab here. Let's go back to our presentation. I'll also mention that if you're using Office 2013 applications, there's a tab on the File menu that allows you to share directly from there, which is really handy. If you have, let's use a Word document as an example. If you have a Word document open and you go to the Share tab, if you haven't saved it to OneDrive for Business yet, you'll be prompted to save to the cloud before you can share, of course, and then you see a very similar interface as I just showed you from the web. So we're going to talk next about Office Delve. So it's another way of sharing and discovering files in OneDrive for Business, and I haven't mentioned it yet, and it's not exactly the same as OneDrive for Business, but it does, I think, deserve a mention here because it is another great way to access OneDrive for Business files. Probably not everyone will use it, but some people may love it, so let's talk about it briefly. So Office Graph is what's behind Delve, and it's Microsoft's machine learning technology that reaches across Office 365, maps out content, interactions, information, and surfaces what is relevant. So that sounds a little subjective. What does that mean? It does get smarter as you use the tool more and more. So we don't have, well, I don't personally have great insight into what's on the back end, but I know from my own personal use that I see files that I have created or modified or accessed a lot, as well as some other pieces of information that are outside OneDrive for Business, like emails, Yammer, messages, that kind of thing. So like I mentioned, the information does include OneDrive for Business files, whether they're your files, others that have been shared, or others that are public. So when you're using Office Delve, you're going to see OneDrive for Business files, and it's just, we can think of it kind of as a portal. It doesn't replace anything, but it's an add-on discovery tool, and you might use it keeping it open in another tab or visiting it a couple times throughout the day proactively, or it might become part of your regular routine. Or you might not use it at all. I haven't heard of any organizations that have made it mandatory for people to use. So it's just kind of a cool thing that's yet another way of discovering and keeping track of files in OneDrive for Business. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper right now. We've looked at some of the basics of saving, sharing, syncing, and we can look now at some more ways to use OneDrive for Business efficiently and productively. Before we get into those, I'm going to scan through the questions. I've gotten some great ones. Unfortunately, I won't be able to answer this. I do have, so one question was, to show where in the admin area outside sharing can be enabled. And I do have that. I'm not going to show it because I think I can send you a link that would be much easier and quicker, but I will keep track of that question. Good question about sharing an entire folder externally. So you can share external folders, you can share entire folders, but like this questioner said, it does require users to have a Microsoft account. And if you are working with clients or customers, you might not want them to have to go through the trouble of creating a Microsoft account, even though it is actually very easy to do. Like I mentioned earlier, you can create essentially a free one. I don't know if that is going to change in the future. I do know for sure that it is feedback that Microsoft gets a lot. So hopefully many voices can make an impact, but I know that for the person that asked that question, you're not the only one with that experience. And then somebody mentioned that they can't see the questions. Those are visible just to me, so feel free to ask a question if you want. Nobody else is going to be able to see it. So, all right, so sharing, as I mentioned, if you have your entire tenant configured this way, sharing does require a recipient to have a Microsoft account, but you can also allow outside sharing. So it's really an admin level control, and if you're not sure, if you're an end user, you can, if you try to share externally and it tells you that you can't, that's a good sign that your admin has disabled that feature. But if you are an admin, you can pick which works best for your organization. All right, so let's continue. So let's talk a little bit more about what are the right reasons for using OneDrive for Business. Again, that sounds a little subjective, but I want to make a few recommendations for how to use OneDrive for Business versus other types of storage we've been used to or we might have available to us. So as I kind of mentioned at the very beginning, OneDrive for Business doesn't replace your personal online storage in OneDrive, or maybe you use Dropbox or another tool on a personal basis to, back up your iPhone photos or something like that. I would not recommend using OneDrive for that. It's really not what it's made for. And I mean, in your organization, you might even be breaking some rules if you do that. So keep that in mind. Even though you do have a lot of space, I wouldn't recommend using it for personal files. And OneDrive for Business does not strictly replace, or it at least isn't the same as your company's old file server. The place where we were used to backing up all of our files, whether it was an S drive or a T drive or something like that. OneDrive for Business is different, as we've been talking about. So it's not exactly a one-to-one comparison. And in some ways, it does have a lot more benefits. There's, different things that you can do with OneDrive for Business than you can do with an older kind of server, but the sync limitations that we've been talking about should come into play and be kept in mind when you compare these two. And OneDrive for Business also is not a replacement for SharePoint. So SharePoint team sites and OneDrive for Business have different uses, and there's a place in the organization for both. So let's look at Microsoft's take on those two things. There's a lot of questions around this, and Microsoft has an entire support page dedicated to this that I'll send the link out for it after this. You'll save your documents to OneDrive for Business when you don't plan to share them, or if you plan to share them, but they'll have a limited scope or life cycle. So the example that I might use is a piece of paperwork for your HR manager, and she or he requests it digitally. You can upload that to OneDrive for Business, share with that one person, and just keep it there. And that way you have total control over it as an individual user. You also can upload documents to OneDrive for Business when you can't identify an existing team site where your document belongs. So there's not a place for it. OneDrive for Business is fine for those things. And of course, you can move documents away from OneDrive for Business if there is a team site that gets developed. So in those cases where there's a larger project or teamwork going on, it would be better to use a SharePoint team site, and you can see that here on the right-hand side. Save documents to SharePoint when you want team members to see them as part of an ongoing project. You want permissions to be granted on a site basis, not on a document basis. So rather than inviting 10 people to view a single document, if you upload a document to your SharePoint team site, whoever has permissions for that entire site will be able to view it, which can be a lot more efficient than trying to do that via OneDrive for Business. And then SharePoint, I'm not going to go into this in detail, but SharePoint has great check-in workflows that you can assign documents to someone else, check-in and check-out documents, that kind of thing. SharePoint is great for all of those processes. All right, I have a couple good questions about virus protection in SharePoint, or sorry, in OneDrive for Business. And those are really good questions, and I actually don't have the answers for you at this point, but something that I think is very important. If an infected file is uploaded to OneDrive for Business, will it be scanned? What happens during that syncing process? I don't have an answer for you, but let's circle back after this and we can talk about that. And then another question about Office 365 groups versus OneDrive for Business versus SharePoint. That is a great question. Office 365 groups are another method of group or teamwork, including mailbox, calendar, file sharing. That's for this webinar, that is outside the scope. We're not really going to talk about Office 365 groups, but especially it's new. It's a new feature, or on the newer end, I should say. So it's something that if people are interested in it, might even be a future webinar topic. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And then, can syncing be enabled for corporate machines but disabled for personal devices? I believe that there's an admin control to restrict syncing only to computers shared on the network. Off the top of my head, I'm not going to show it or try to kind of get to it during the presentation, but I'm pretty positive that that is possible. All right, let's move on to our sixth method of OneDrive for Business efficiently, and that's basic organization. This, like I said, it seems like a basic tip, but it is something to keep in mind. So keeping track of all of your documents can, of course, be challenging. The first tip might seem obvious, but implement your own preferred organization method. And if you are one of those users who hasn't used OneDrive for Business yet very much, implement your own now. Start early if you can, whether it's creating folders by date or by topic or business area. I would recommend doing what works for you. You also can use OneDrive for Business search. So let's quickly show that. So the search feature up here in the upper left, you can search through all of your accessible OneDrive for Business files. So let's say looking for an expense report, and I get this kind of flyout tab that shows it to me, and I can open it directly from there. There's also a more in-depth search that some of you may be familiar with. If I say search everything, those of you who use SharePoint are probably familiar with this search. So I can see based on result type, author, change the modified date range, that kind of thing. So search can be really powerful for organization and discovery as well. You also have recent, shared with me, and followed folders for you in the left-hand pane of OneDrive for Business. So the downside of these folders is that they're essentially kind of like search results packaged up into a folder, so you can't really implement your own organization method for those because they're search results. So the folder system that you might have in your main documents document library is not going to apply here, but it is another way to access important documents. And then a little bit more on that followed folder. So following documents is a feature that is in OneDrive for Business, and it can allow you to keep track of documents that you might need to have at your fingertips, but either you didn't make them or they just don't belong in any other place. You can follow a document. There's kind of a flyout menu that has a star follow feature, and then you can retrieve them from that folder. in OneDrive for Business. So this is a great thing to do for like public documents, or if you're like a project manager, keeping track of your teamwork and that kind of thing. So stay organized. It's always a challenge, but with OneDrive for Business, especially as your organization uses it more and more, it is important. All right, now let's talk about combining the benefits of OneDrive and email. So this is something super exciting for those of us who use the Outlook web app for Office 365. So this spring, some long-awaited features were added where you can attach files from OneDrive for Business without opening an additional window, or you don't have to drag and drop, and the attachment menu connects right up with OneDrive. You can also save one or more attachments directly, and you get guidance on larger files. So your organization's message size limit might be a lot smaller than the limited OneDrive for Business. So you don't waste your time trying to send those files as attachments. You can just keep them in OneDrive for Business. And unfortunately, these features don't exist for Outlook 2013. So we have gotten the message from Microsoft that the functionality should be coming to a future version of the desktop Outlook, but of course you can just save Outlook 2013 attachments to your local OneDrive for Business folder and they sync. If you really want to use OneDrive and Outlook as efficiently as possible, I would recommend the web version, Outlook on the web. All right, let's do a little pop quiz just to break things up a bit. This isn't anything that I've mentioned, but we're going to launch this poll here. Just for fun, what is the name of the Office 2007 tool that was a precursor to OneDrive for Business? We'll test your knowledge here. Go ahead and take the poll, and I'm going to glance through the questions we've gotten. All right, so gotten a lot of answers. I will spoil the surprise and tell you now that it was called Groove. So OneDrive for Business kind of evolved from a series of SharePoint products, and Groove was one of those. The other ones you saw on the screen, a couple of them were Microsoft products. One was a Google product. So I got some more good questions, and I'll update you all on a couple things. So I think the virus protection question was a good one, and someone updated us. So OneDrive for Business, according to Microsoft, will scan each document before uploading it to verify that it's not a known virus or malware distributor. But of course, do still use caution if someone you don't know tries to send you a file or invites you to a folder using OneDrive for Business or any other file sharing program. So use caution and common sense. And all right, so folder structures within organization, it's easy to run up against that path length, and the person who mentioned this believes that it's 250 characters maximum today. That's something that I've heard as well, and I believe that those character limits are going to be addressed with the next generation client that should come out in the end of 2015, but we'll have to kind of wait and see. And then another question I'll answer, can you save documents from Outlook to somewhere outside of the email attachment folder? So what that question is referring to is this. I don't think I've saved from email on this, so you won't see it here, but in your menu over on the left-hand side, there will be an email attachments folder once you start saving things from Outlook. Unfortunately, you can't direct your attachments to anywhere other than that folder for now. They'll directly go there, and then of course you can move them around if you want. All right, so let's talk about briefly, unfortunately, we only have one slide dedicated to administrators, but I do want to go over at least one slide because IT admins are the folks with the most insight into tools like OneDrive for Business very often and can really kind of get a wide view of the pros and cons for the entire organization. So admins have a lot of power to make OneDrive for Business useful and efficient for end users with controls and monitoring offered by Office 365, as well as just by user education. So what administrators can do, know how much storage is available. So I think this related to a question that was asked, but I'm not sure if that question was for end user or admin. But there's, in the SharePoint Admin Center, if you go to your site settings, you'll see a bar, basically like a bar graph that will kind of fill up as you fill up more and more storage, and you can see just at a glance what's left. So a good thing for admins to keep in mind. And that was an admin question, so hopefully that helped. And then they can access user files if necessary via the SharePoint Admin Center as well. And along with accessing files, eDiscovery Search can help an admin perform searches against user files if there needs to be compliance checks or things like that. And then version control is something important to mention, and I don't know if all admins are aware that they can enable or disable version control or set a cap on the number of versions that are stored so users can view or restore previous versions of documents. And that is a really important thing that users will thank you for if it's available to be done in your organization. There might be reasons in certain orgs not to do that, but if possible, that's something admins can do. And then lastly, there are a number of third-party tools that can surface information on OneDrive for Business across an entire tenant or organization. So if that kind of additional insight is needed, there are some options there. And I know admins do a whole lot related to OneDrive for Business, so that's just one portion of it and a very high level view. So we'll move on from there, and we could again dedicate an entire webinar probably to just admin actions. So we're going to wrap up here with a look at both the limitations and the benefits of OneDrive for Business and kind of sum up some of these things that we've been talking about. And like a lot of software, knowing the limitations of OneDrive for Business will help you use it more effectively. And we have mentioned some of these. So we mentioned unsupported characters and file size limits, item count limits, file path link limitations, things like that. So those are that limitation does exist. If you try to sync a document that has a slash in the document name, you'll be blocked from syncing. A lot of those actually just are limitations within Office or within Windows. So some you might never even notice or attribute to OneDrive for Business. But luckily, this is something that can be worked around in terms of sync, and you'll find a lot of information out there, I think, emphasizing what you can't sync, but I would just recommend educate your users, or if you are an end user, educate yourself about kind of how to name your files in OneDrive for Business. Size limit as well is another thing at play here. So you can't sync files larger than 2 gigs, and that could cause some difficulty for some organizations, but the average person might not notice that. UI limitations. So some people, I have heard a little bit of frustration, I guess, with the web interface of OneDrive for Business. So for example, the shared with me view. You can't sort that, you can't create folders in that view. Those are limitations that we can kind of work around. Again, you work most frequently from your documents folder, and you'll be able to reap the benefits of the organization that we talked about earlier, and then use things like the shared with me view as secondary methods of finding and accessing documents. And then speaking of end user training, like we have been a little bit, there might be some issues with getting users comfortable with the tool. So whether it's the terminology, like we mentioned in the beginning, or actually uploading and syncing OneDrive files, that's something that it actually might occur across Office 365, but it's certainly true here. And I would say we can combat that again as much as possible with end user training. And then lastly, I think we can be really optimistic, especially right now, as we are sort of in the latter half of 2015, about new features that we're looking forward to. But Microsoft is a very large organization, and so it does take time for some of those features to be released. But we know that there are new things coming up. So selective sync, sort of loosening or removal of some of these limitations with syncing. So we can kind of keep track of the roadmap, and I'll share some resources with you guys so that you can look into that yourself. And so we can keep an eye on, and admins especially can get a chance to test out new features as they roll out into your Office 365 tenants. So all that being said, I also would say let's embrace the benefits of OneDrive for Business. So satisfaction with the tool kind of remains high, and you can focus on the ways that you can use it efficiently rather than the ways that you can't. So accessibility is a big one. You can access OneDrive for Business files on any device. I know I personally, if I need to look at something on my iPhone, I have a OneDrive for Business app there. And if you work from home and the office, you can have OneDrive for Business on syncing on both of those machines, which is really great and something that wouldn't have happened 5 or 10 years ago. So something that we definitely enjoy and have come to even require. We have easy sharing, like I mentioned earlier, something that doesn't even require a lot of training to be able to do. And OneDrive for Business is integrated all across Office 365, and that integration functionality is getting even better, like we looked at with OneDrive and Outlook. We see OneDrive for Business integrations even outside of Office 365. You can open Dropbox files in OneDrive for Business. You can open Google Drive files in OneDrive for Business. So those things are great, but even within Office 365 also. They're in our Office 365 for Business plans, so something that you get without having to think about or to get an add-on for. Plenty of storage. Our end users all have an entire terabyte of storage, and that should be increasing at some point to unlimited. It was announced, although I know most of us just see our 1 terabyte for now. You get all the benefits of Office Online. So I opened a Word document earlier. I created a Word doc. It saved directly into OneDrive for Business. And so all of those benefits that come with Office Online, like real-time co-authoring, coexist with OneDrive for Business. We talked about versioning and history and auditing and reporting a little bit when we were talking about admins. So those features are great, and having those built into OneDrive for Business can really come in handy in an organization. So for both end users and IT managers, we do have a lot of good notes to end on. So we're going to wrap up here in conclusion. I do have some questions that I didn't get to. So what I'm planning on doing is sending out kind of a recap. We'll publish that on 365ninja.com, and I'll get those questions answered for those of you who asked them. And then I'll also send out a link to the recording. So if I know a couple people had to leave, and if there's anything that you want to recap or send on, you'll be able to do that. So just to kind of wrap it up, we talked a lot about what OneDrive for Business is and what it isn't, and how to use it and how not to use it, in contrast with things like your personal OneDrive and SharePoint. All of those pieces of information are important for being able to use it efficiently. We also looked at easy and efficient ways to save, share, and discover files. We looked at sync technology. We looked at organizational tips and how to use OneDrive for Business with Outlook on the web, and took a quick, unfortunately brief look at IT admin controls, and closed by looking at sort of the limitations and the benefits of OneDrive for Business as a whole. So we'll close our webinar. I appreciate everyone's attendance, and like I mentioned at the beginning, if you haven't already, I would encourage you to go to 365ninja.com like you see on your screen here, so that we can keep you posted on future webinars like this one, get you answers to your questions, and you'll receive the link to the recording. So I know a lot of you are already subscribers, and I appreciate that. I know some of you have forwarded the newsletter to your colleagues, and that really helps us. So thanks to those of you who've done that. And so for those of you who've made it to the end with me here, you are eligible to win a Surface 3. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. Thanks again, and feel free to get in touch with us, email with any questions, comments, feedback. Happy to hear anything that you have to share. So thanks very much.